good morning to everyone. And I'm very pleased to moderate this roundtable today. I'm very humble also, because I have a very impressive panel today. Starting with Jan Meijel, who is medical advisor at the e-health medical advisor at the French Ministry. In the order, sorry. Stephanie Alassania, who's professor in applied mathematics and also VP for innovation at the Paris-Cité University and also chair at the Prayer Institute. Another chair at the Prayer Institute, Raphaël Porcher, who's a professor in biostatistics. And finally, Jean-Louis Fraisse, who's a doctor in industrial pharmacy and co-founder of Bot Design. So I'm Raphael Parker, principal scientist at Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine in the Data Science and Digital Health department. And I'm happy to moderate this very innovative and slightly provocative, maybe, question. And it's quite a challenge because we're all a bit chatty here. I mean, most of us quite chatty. So I had the challenge of moderating this in 20 minutes, 25 minutes, sorry. Maybe we should start first with defining what we mean as virtual cohorts, because we hear a lot of different stuff. So maybe Stephanie, would you mind?
Yes. So thank you for this invitation. So what do we call virtual cohorts? We want to make the difference between virtual cohorts and synthetic cohorts. Synthetic cohorts are patients that have been included in previous clinical trials that you gather together to create a new arm in a new clinical trial. Whereas virtual cohorts are fake patients, patients that you only produce numerically that do not correspond to anybody in the population.
Thank you very much. So brand new patients making the cohorts bigger, right? If I understand right. Thank you. And it sounds very exciting because we can really see all the applications that can be. From a very pragmatic point of view, it will decrease the cost, okay, of the trials, but also make it faster mechanically. If you have less patients to recruit, it takes less time to run the trials. So that's, making the product faster to the patients. So that's very exciting. It can even make some trials possible in some very rare disease where we always struggle to recruit patients to reach statistical significance. This could make it possible. Few patients, big cohorts, thanks to those new created patients. So that would be amazing. And in the same vein, we can think of all those underrepresented patients. And that's a big issue we have, and we try to address at J&J. Some populations are not represented enough in the trials in terms of ethnicity for some of the diseases, but of course also all the vulnerable populations. So pregnant women, kids, elderly, you name it, immunosuppressive patients, I mean, so many, okay? If we could actually represent those patients in our trials, that would be really revolutionary. And maybe one last point, from an ethical point of view, if we could have less patients receiving placebo, that would also be a great achievement. So, a lot of dreams, but maybe we can just pause right now to see what is the usage of synthetic data today. So those fake data are completely generated. And I'll turn to you, Jean-Louis. Can you tell us about the current use of synthetic data, what is already done, and also what is the current accepted usage, let's say, of those data?
Thank you, Raphael. Thank you for your invitation. Synthetic data are already used in healthcare today. Synthetic data generated could be excluded from the scope of GDPR legislation. And we are already working with the CNIL on this subject. Synthetic data helps provision and exchange of healthcare data because they protect patients' anonymity and privacy. It's very important because they boost patient trust in the provision of their data. Synthetic data generated from imaging and clinical data are used to more rapidly train machine learning, deep learning algorithms for medical stratification and pre-diagnostic. They speed up the time up to market for medical device. And synthetic data could swap all or part of the control arms in the stage 3 clinical trial for research into orphan disease and high-risk people as pregnant women, children, and elderly. We are working actually with the French regulatory authority to approve synthetic control arms in clinical trials.
Thank you very much. Very informative. And now facing back to the future, maybe talking about the present future, let's say. I mean research, okay? Research in AI. Stephanie, can you tell us, what is in the lab? What is actually seen as the most promising tools to generate those virtual cohorts?
So actually, this is generative AI. This is
in a way,
yeah. But it's quite old in its, let's say, classical way. You can use both classical statistics and equation to mimic a phenomena, or you can use deep learning if you want to produce these generative algorithms. We have been developing both, the ones that are using classical statistical generative models. And we wanted to face the case where we have high dimension but low sample size in our training set to use deep learning, but in a certain way that it could be efficient. So we managed to combine mathematical constraint and mathematical representation with deep learning training, so that at the end of the day, we are able to use in a training set very low number of patients that are actually used for training and can produce 10 or 100 times the number that we have from the beginning. So both standard statistics and deep learning method can be used now and are developed now, so that we are able to produce realistic, in terms of visual patient, realistic patient that are actually increasing the power of statistical tests when you try to test some effect on, let's say, disease or whatever. So we have, for the moment, been able to use imaging and tabular data to produce fake patients with those two kinds of methods. And the last challenge now is to do what Jean-Louis just said, really prove that all these fake patients will not be data that can re-identify the former patients, so that we will be able to extract them from the place they were produced and gather them together with other cohorts from other places to produce multicentric cohorts. And that will increase both the representativeness of the population and the number of patients that we can use. And of course, the unbalanced clusters will be reevaluated.
Thank you very much. I love when the mathematicians try to talk about the clinics, talk about clusters. When we talk about subpopulation, I love it. Thank you very much. You can tell it's applied mathematics, right? Thank you, Stephanie. It's here, basically, right? It's now, if we have to merge those discoveries with the expectations, right? So maybe I will turn to you, Raphael. Could you enlighten us with what qualitative and quantitative data could help the regulators to position themselves? Because, undoubtedly we have to think of this as soon as now.
Thank you, Raphael. Well, the question of virtual cohorts and their use to assess health interventions in general, could be pharmaceutical products, but also digital therapeutics, is relatively new. So how health authorities, health regulators, HTAs, or payers, whoever they may be, would consider those data is still something which is under construction. So we are working on that. So Jean-Louis said he's in touch with the French regulators. I think many things in Europe are being built, and the same in the US. So we don't start from nothing. Like what exists for a while is so-called in silico trials, the more mechanistic models, less deep learning or less learned statistical learning-based methods, but models that allow to generate, in some sense, the data, putting some beliefs on how the mechanism is. And for those in silico trials, there are already people that have reflected on what we should do to have trust. And I have seen that AI for Health this year is based on the trust in AI. And it's a lot of about trust. So we need a precise description of the question of interest, the context of use, defining together the acceptability criteria of the model for that precise question. It's not something always broad. We need a description of the regulatory impact if you use those, a thorough description of the model, credibility, trust. I come to that if I have time later. The applicability and uncertainty around that model or that data. Like we statisticians are mad about uncertainty, but that matters. And also perhaps the issues that are more regulatory, like what is related to the model-based decision making. So what counts could be evaluating the data generation model by itself, like if you have mechanistic models or hybrid models, part mechanistic, part statistical learning, then how much they fit with the current beliefs of the disease. If you have simple regression models, how well they fit the data. If you have more deep learning, like VAs or GANs, Stephanie mentioned, how they are done. And then you have to evaluate the adequacy of the model in line with the study objectives. There are many aspects about implementation, and this goes down such as coding. Does the code you use do what you say you do? Transparency of the algorithm, including the methods for development and validations, aspect related to the robustness of the algorithm, to data perturbation, adversarial attacks, anything you can think of. And the required level of evidence may depend on the use, like whether you are trying to augment data to train algorithms, to do in silico trials, to select doses, drugs, candidate drugs, or if you are at the end of the evaluation process, as Jean-Louis mentioned, like replacing control patients for phase 3 and final evaluation. Stephanie talked about validation methods, the trust we need, like the capacity of the algorithm to reproduce data that have been observed, but on which the algorithm were never trained, of course. External validation of predictions, and there are many methods that can be used for that, like classical metrics, such as R-square, discrimination, calibration, but there have been also specific metrics for such data that have been developed. And at the end, there is also the question about the data used to train the models, the data used to validate the models. So all those aspects should be covered if we need to gain trust in those virtual cohorts.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Raphael. A lot to consider and to keep in mind, and it's a lot to keep in mind when you reach this stage of using AI to those phase 3 phases. So thanks very much for pointing those out. So I hear some technical considerations, methods considerations, of course, but it will also take a new mindset to evaluate those new approaches. And it leads us to you, Yanmel. So according to you, what is at stake in terms of regulatory authorities? What are the challenges that are to be considered?
Thank you for the invitation. We have many challenges to understand all possible impacts of virtual cohorts on the system and all the system, not only evaluation. First, that was said already, the contribution of virtual cohorts in terms of clinical research. We need to understand more the strengths of these technologies and the place of this in the evaluation framework to evaluate medical device and so on. And we need for that more understand all the limits and the strengths of that, and we need to have more data, and that's why what that was said. But beyond that, we also we must go further and look at all the other impacts in terms of prediction, care pathway prediction, of medical choice, in terms of personalization, prevention, and so on. And this is a real new whole area we need to understand to answer that question. We will be able to ask all the rules, standard, financing, and so.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it goes a very further than just the the making of those virtual cohorts for sure. And that's why I want to thank you all again for being all very different experts and bringing those. And maybe definitely also keeping in mind what was just mentioned before, that in the end, we always have a human, comments on what you were saying, that has to validate whatever decision comes from AI. It's really a tool, and in the end, the human keeps the decision. But there will still be a lot to consider because, once people are used to using AI, how much of their final decision is impacted by the usage of those tools. So, we're almost getting to a philosophical discussion here. So maybe, I should keep the time in mind. But maybe how would you see still, to you, Jan-Mel, maybe what would be the steps? There is a whole change management here, okay? So what would be the steps to bring, so maybe I'm not going to ask you the whole population and the society, but let's be small, start small. For the health authorities, regulatory authorities, what would be the steps that leads this change management?
Maybe 3 little points. We need to have a step-by-step approach, I think, beginning by reliability data. That's what was already said for French authorities and EMA. And I think we need to show leadership and conviction because it's a real paradigm shift for everyone. And for the French authority, we have already some plan. We have the e-health roadmap to support that. And we have also the plan France Relance to support ecosystem and to support investment in that area.
Okay, thank you very much. So taking the leadership, okay, means also that, so typically this kind of events, I think it's a very, very good example, acculturation, etc., etc. But from a very pragmatic point of view, I think there are some steps that can help us to have this leadership. And I know that you guys are really working at this through many different channels. We have to prove, okay, basically all that you mentioned, we have to prove and show to the world that it works, that it's reliable, that we can trust it. And this will go through some proof of concepts. I know that you're working on that. And that's a lot of, a huge piece, okay, to actually prove that this can be done. And also prepare the mindset. One way of doing this, and we can expect maybe there is already some workshops with the EMA, etc., of course, and not just the EMA, of course, everywhere in the world. And one step I think that is quite important is the typically preparing by trying to summarize all those things that has to be taken into consideration. And if I'm not mistaken, there is a white paper in the preparation. And Stephanie, if you want to tell us about it.
Yes. So starting by the fact that we were actually able now to produce fake patients, and in high dimension, low sample size with images, and increase the power of classifier, for example, we decided to gather people together and try to think about what would be an interesting summary of what does exist and what could be done for the next step, both in terms of technique, and of course I'm part of that, of the quantitative and qualitative validation, the use case that we can think about, and both Raphaël and Jean-Louis talked about that, and all the regulatory issues that we think that we may face in the next future. And so we try to motivate people, but it was quite easy actually because this was a interesting topic for everybody. So we have around the table for writing this white paper, both academic people, so Raphaël and myself, but other people as well from Prague Institute. We have private company, D&G, and Pfizer for the big ones, but we have also Bot Design and other small startups. And we have also both the ministry, represented by Yann Maël, the Haute Autorité de Santé, HAS, and the CNIL, the Conseil National Informatique et Liberté, who are talking all together to try to write down what's going to be the next steps, what will be required for people who will provide algorithms that will generate these synthetic cohorts, both, again, in terms of human validation and quantitative mathematical validation. And so this white paper is under construction, I would say, but closer to the end than the start. And we hope that people will really try to read it and comment on it, so that we are going to have also feedbacks from all people that would take these methods in hand and try to use it.
At some point, right? And we also even have input from ethical, also aspects, and yeah, no, really covering. I mean, trying at least, because at some point it always, it's a loop. So yeah.
By the way, we have also patient associations that are represented.
Yes. Yeah. The more we go along, the more people we add. So it's a topic that is interesting to so many different parties. And well, thank you very much. I'm considerate of the time, so that will be actually the last word for this round table. So I really want to thank each one of you for your expertise, and thank you all for attending this round table.
Thank you.